From small sprite inaccuracies to a whole story behind the weird Gen 2 Pokemon color palettes, let me tell you some intriguing facts about Pokemon Sprites that'll definitely make you the cool guy between all the guys and gals. Confirmation still pending. Errors in Pokemon Sprites. Even though the vast majority of Pokemon Sprites correctly and nicely depict a Pokemon, there are still some errors or inconsistencies that slip through the cracks. To show what I mean, let me mention some of my favorites. Clefairy's Gen 1 sprite not only has a wing missing in its back sprite, but it also has an upside down tail which lasts up to Gen 5. Some a little bit more well known is Koffing having its skull marked on its forehead instead of below the face, or Lugia having black spikes instead of the usual blue. But back to some more obscure ones. Magneton's Generation 3 sprites depicted having 9 screws, although its official art and later depictions show it having 7. In Gen 2 and most of Gen 3, Exeggutor has an extra head, which is clearly seen in the Backsprites, although since the DS entries it has yet to be seen ever again. Some quick honorable mentions before moving on to the next topic are Manectric not having its ear hole, Shiny Togepi in Diamond and Pearl having orange and red patterns instead of the red and blue, and finally for now, every Gen 1 Backsprite, yeah, how clever, sure. But if we exclude that, then it's one that you may have heard of. All of Machamp's sprites on the Game Boy Advance entries has its belt missing. I wonder what's holding them up. Setting up as a payoff for the next fact, do you know the story behind how the Gen 5 sprites were made? Since Pokemon Black and White introduced the most new Pokemon and made a new total 649, they were going to have a lot of work on their plate. So, to achieve the goal of making a sprite for every single Pokemon, Game Freak came up with a clever way to not only speed up the process of making the sprites, but also upkeeping a somewhat consistent quality. A good amount of the already existing Pokemon use their Diamond, Pearl or Platinum sprites as a base, then from that design a sprite sheet with a Pokemon split up in parts was made. When getting to the animating process, the artists would rotate and move the parts separately, so that on each frame there would be no need for redrawing or fixing the sprite. Which also is the reason why some sprites can get very messy or pixelated. There were supposed to be multiple gender-specific sprites for every Pokemon that were way more noticeable instead of the slim changes in Diamond and Pearl, but they ended up being cut before the final release. Either we count that as a loss with designs like Black Stomach Beedrill, Chimecho with a yellow tail end, or Yanma with yellow patterned wings. While we're still on the topic, let's quickly look at some cool gender differences that we did get. For example, some very well-known ones like the obvious opposing Hippowdon colors, or differing on pheasants. Yet some differences that are less known but still interesting are Cypher and its bigger or smaller abdomen, Wooper having a shorter or longer gill branch, Giraffring having either more yellow on its body or a 50-50 split of yellow and brown, Cacturn having 2 small or 1 big spikes on its chest, and many more, which I could make a whole video about if I wanted to. Turns out, the shiny for Bulbasaur has had an identity crisis in the past until Gen 6. Since starting out in Gen 2, shiny Bulbasaur was overall a light green, but heading into the Advanced era, its bulb shifted into a dark green, but later on in the DS games, it evens out a bit with a darker body and a lighter bulb, only to finally become a 3D model with a mostly similar color palette as it started out with. Well, there was the moment that a gold variant of it was used as an icon sprite for glitch Pokemon, but I'm glad you figured yourself out there in the end, bud. We all know how the gold and silver sprites for many Gen 2 Pokemon look way different than they would end up looking. But did you know the actual reasoning for it? Well, since the Game Boy had a monochrome screen, The sprites for the next Pokemon entries were made with differing colors that don't match their Sugimori art, so that they wouldn't look off on those screens. But soon after, with Pokemon Crystal on the Game Boy Color, the Pokemon sprites, due to the new and better screen on the handheld, were adjusted to like we recognize them today. When a person who plays Pokemon Fire Red or Leaf Green trades with someone who's playing Ruby, Sapphire or Emerald, both of the players, while being in the trading room, can, of course, see each other's characters, which are the respective game's protagonists. But if you take a closer look, you can see that the sprites for them differ from their original game. The controversial initial color of Jinx's skin was something that everyone has heard of, even if you barely have stumbled into the Pokemon community. As we all know, after Gen 1, Jinx's skin was swiftly edited to be purple instead of black. But did you know that for Gold and Silver, its skin was still portrayed as being black? Now, of course, in the international versions it was purple, but in Japanese copies of the game the change was not made. But, of course, in future releases and re-releases like on the Virtual Console, the purple skin change was made universal. But a thing that was not universal on the other hand was a single Pokemon in the Game Boy entries, which had 5 colors instead of the limited 4 color palette. Which Pokemon did have this highly noteworthy perk, you may be asking? Well, it's Jinx in the spotlight yet again. But then again, it was spottable in a bit more of an obscure instance, since the sprite was only findable in the Virtual Console version of Pokemon Yellow. You may be also asking, if the limit was 4 colors, how did they add the 5th one? Which is a pretty good question, since I was just about to tell you about it. You see, they made 8x8 tiles of Jinx's sprite, use a separate color comparing to the rest of the sprite, which had purple instead of black spots. Klinklang, not really a winner in any sort of popularity contests, we all know that. Well, usually not having any special things about it. Surprisingly, turns out that's kind of not true, even though the unique thing about it is very minuscule, and in the long run that doesn't make it an overall better Pokemon. Even though the rest of the Pokemon sprites are mirrored correctly with things such like wings, claws, horns, or anything getting drawn and placed correctly when looking from the back, Klinklang and Co have their gears in the exact same identical spots in both sprites, although they technically would have to be on the right. There, now you got a justification for liking Klinklang. Just like our dear Pokepals, the NPCs have also had designs in the beta stages which have ended up being scrapped. The most interesting case of this which I found was for the Ruby and Sapphire games, which featured a trainer with yellow skin and inhuman proportions. Although seeming like nothing much at first, this design turns out to be just a redesign from a different game, which is Game Freak's first ever video game, Mendel Palace. Oh, and I guess the Gold Silver's protagonist had a different look in his sprite as well, and yeah, Red was way more edgier with his whip. In the Space World demo for Gold and Silver, if you were able to hatch an egg, you would have seen that the egg not only had a different sprite compared to the final rendition, but also a small addition to this fact is that when the Pokemon hatched, its level would be 2 instead of 5 for some weird reason, then of course later becoming level 1 for all future games. And those were some facts about the Pokemon sprites of the past that I could muster up for today. Now, go and impress your loved ones with your newly gained life-changing knowledge, but in the meantime, subscribe and stay tuned for more.